All right, let's start with a simple American one, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act signed into law in 1988 by President Ronald Reagan. Before I go into specifics, I want to get one thing out of the way because I'm sure there's at least a few people that want to comment on this and say that's an anti-drug act. It has nothing to do with race. This is a common gaslighting tactic based on the premise that a public policy has to expressly mention race for it to be possible for it to be an example of racial discrimination. But just as dose makes the poison, enforcement makes the law. This is why one of the primary functions of the International Convention for the Eradication of Racial Discrimination, which the United States both ratified and claims to be in compliance with, was to define discrimination in a way that decoupled intent from impact. This is so politicians couldn't draft a bill in a way that made it ostensibly non-racial, enforce it in a way that was clearly racially biased, and then pretend that wasn't the plan all along. With that out of the way, back to the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988. This was part of Ronald Reagan's greater tough-on-crime approach. It's interesting in several ways, but our focus right now is the part about crack cocaine. Chemically, there's no difference between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine. Crack cocaine is just dissolving powdered cocaine in sodium bicarbonate in water. The difference is in the real world is that powdered cocaine was usually sold in higher quantities, making it much more expensive to buy, whereas crack cocaine was usually sold in single uses. Crack cocaine had also been the subject of Ronald Reagan's massive fear-mongering and dog-whistling campaign, linking it unequivocally to violent crime and the corruption of youth. This is how they justified in this act of making crack cocaine the only drug to have a mandatory minimum sentence for your first non-violent offense. You could get 5 years in prison for possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine. To put that in perspective, on average, to get 5 years for powdered cocaine, you'd have to be caught with half a kilo. So how is this enforced? Interestingly, if you look at the best available data, the percentage of white people who use drugs relative to the overall white population and the percentage of black people who use drugs relative to the overall black population are about the same. Difference is, the total amount of white people in the United States is far greater. Based on a 2006 census, about 6 times greater. So you would expect those numbers to be reflected in the amount of people being arrested and going to jail for drug offenses. If you break it down on a per capita, apples-to-apples basis, black people are sent to jail for drug offenses at about 252 per 100,000 of population. On the other hand, about 25 white people per 100,000 white population are sent to jail for drug offenses. Black men are 11.8 times more likely to go to prison for a drug offense than white men in the United States. Since 1988, black people have also been far more likely to be hit with those extremely harsh minimum sentences exclusive to crack cocaine. For example, in 2004, a review of the Seattle Police Department revealed that even though about 70% of Seattle's population is white, and the majority of people who were selling and using drugs in Seattle were white, about 2/3 of the arrests were black. 3/4 of the arrests were crack-related, even though an estimated 1/3 of all transactions involved crack, and 79% of the crack-related arrests were black.